Good morning and welcome back to our live stream classes on beginning woodworking design in Fusion 360. What we're going to be doing today is a little bit of an extension of what we did a few days ago with our dovetail drawer. We're going to be making a little dovetail box, but I'm not going to assume that you've watched the dovetail drawer video, and we're going to take it step by step right from the beginning, and I'm going to do my best to explain everything. So here we have our standard installation of Fusion 360. There's no add-ons, no plugins, no extra downloaded content or anything like that. So if you get the student version, the teacher version, which this is, or the free version, which is actually missing a little piece, but nothing that we're going to be using today or in any of these beginner classes, it will look exactly like this. The only thing we're going to change from the default settings is to go over here to this navigation cube, right-click, and turn on Perspective with Ortho Faces, which allows us to see things pretty much exactly as they would be in a photograph. Now, if we go over here to Document Settings in this tree on the left, I'm going to do my American watchers a favor and render this whole thing in inches. It's a little bit of an experiment for me. I've done a few of these in the past. Of course, my whole life is mostly in metric, so it's a little bit of a foreign language for me. But I will do my best, and it's one of the feedbacks that I have been trying to act on lately as we have moved some of our live classes to YouTube to reach a larger audience. All right, so we're going to get started. The first thing that you want to do when you use Fusion 360 is to understand the difference between a three-dimensional object and a two-dimensional drawing. Everything starts from a 2D drawing called a sketch. Now when we sketch, we click on this New Sketch button up here on the left, and we pick a direction that we're going to sketch in. Now we're going to call this a plane, but really what we're talking about is what direction are we looking at? So if you look at the top of a box, so we're going to pick looking down at the top of the box, and you look at it, that's where you're going to get all the dimensions for the shape of the box, the size, how the joinery is going to work on the inside. All right, so I'm going to start here. We're going to start by modeling it right around the center. You see the center point here. It is marked, almost looks like a nuclear symbol there, but that is the origin. And I'm going to pick a center point rectangle, which is right here. It's like the rectangle tool, but it has a little dot in the center. So that means that instead of drawing from one corner to the other, I draw from the center, which I'm going to put in the middle of the map, up. Now, I don't know how big that is, and it doesn't matter. A lot of people try to get these things right when they're drawing them, but it really makes no difference. Now, I'm going to make this box about the same size as a large photograph, like a large snapshot. So I'm going to go up here to the Dimension tool, and I'm going to click Dimension, which means I'm going to set dimensions on this. And I click on this line, the longer dimension. Now, you can do anything you want to get the numbers in here, and we'll talk about some other ways that you can get them in a moment. But I'm just going to type in 7, because it's going to be 7 inches. And now I'll go over here and I'll pick the side, and the side is going to be 4.5 inches. So we're going to have a 4.5 by 7 inch box. Now if I scroll in, I can zoom. If I click with the middle mouse button, I can drag around the picture so I can see other parts of it. And if I scroll in and out, it's just like using a mapping software, Google Maps or Apple Maps. It works exactly the same way. Now, something that I should probably mention is, to do this modeling, you need a mouse. Not a trackpad. It's really not going to work for you. I was very hesitant to switching from my trackpad, which I absolutely love. I have an Apple trackpad, and it is amazing for everything else on a computer, especially all my graphic work, but it doesn't work for this 3D modeling. You need a bunch of actual buttons and rotation. So do yourself a favor, spend the 10 bucks, get a cheap Bluetooth mouse, and it will make it so much easier on you. With that being said, we are now going to continue. I will hit Escape to exit the tool, and you can see it goes away and goes back to just my regular mouse pointer. I can click on anything and select it, but one of the things that a lot of people overlook is if you double-click, it selects the whole chain. in this case, this whole box. And I'm going to push X, which is going to convert it from an actual drawing that we can use to make a 3D model to being a guide. I call these reference lines. I think they actually call them something different in Fusion 360. They call them construction lines, but I think that's really confusing because the ones that I actually want to construct something with are not these. These are the ones I don't want to construct anything. So I really don't like that they call it a construction line. All right, so the thing we want to figure out now is if we're going to make a box, which side is going to be the pins and which side is going to be the tails. Now, I think these boxes look better with the tails on the short side. So we're going to draw half the pin side. We'll click up here on our rectangle and draw half the pins. We're not actually going to draw the pins, just the pin board. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to draw half the tails board minus the tails. Okay? So we're only going to draw 1/4 of the sides of this box. You'll see why in a second, but the thing I want to be careful of is that they're going to be the same thickness. I know there are reasons why you might not want to do that, but we're going to make this box out of all one thickness of wood. So I'll click up here on dimension, and I'm going to say that between the outside line and the inside line is going to be 3/8 of an inch. Now, that box has turned black. That means that it knows enough dimensions to actually draw this shape. This one still has a blue line in it. The blue lines mean it doesn't really know where to put it. You can drag it around. So if I just click on it, I can drag it around, and that's fine. If I do the same thing for this one, no, it knows exactly where that is because I have fully defined it. If you don't fully define the sketches, you will end up with problems later on. So make sure you fully define your sketches. Now, I could go in here and dimension this and type in 3/8 of an inch. But if I change that 3/8, I'd then have to go and change this 3/8 too. So instead of that, I'm going to go up here to constraints and click equals. And I'm going to say that this line over here on that board is the same as this line over here on this board. And now you can see the whole thing has gone black. All right, so I'm going to say finish sketch. I've only had to put in one dimension up here plus the size of our boundary box. Not bad. So now we have our two-dimensional model here, but we are going to be seeing it in 3D. You can see this cube up on the right-hand side tells us what we are looking at. If I hold down Shift and use the middle mouse button to drag around, you'll see the cube moves the same way as our model moves, and we can rotate around it. The other commands work the same way. Click with the middle mouse button and drag, or zoom in and zoom out using the scroll wheel. You can practice with those as much as you like, but I assume that you probably have vague familiarity with a computer, so we're not going to belabor the point too much. Now, if we pick this Extrude tool, extrude means turn something that is only 2 dimensions into something that is 3. I'm going to click on the long side, and I will drag it up in this direction. We can see that it's getting bigger. And I'm going to pick that instead of typing it in, I'm going to go over here to the panel and I'm going to type in that I want this box to be 1 3/8 inches tall. And hit OK. If you notice, our sketch has disappeared, but we have this new folder over here with bodies. So let's talk about the difference between a body and a component. We're not going to use a component yet, but we will use those in a minute. A body is a 3-dimensional object. So we have a sketch, which is a 2-dimensional drawing. A body is a single 3-dimensional object. You can think of a body as being a single piece of wood. The way I usually explain it is, if you have a whole bunch of pieces of paper, each piece of paper is a body. Now, if you want to sort those pieces of paper, you can get a bunch of file folders, and you could put some of the pieces of paper in each folder. Each folder is like a component. But if you want to keep sorting those even more, you can take each of those folders and figure out which box it goes in. So you might have 1,000 sheets of paper, and you might have 10 folders, 5 boxes, and you might have 2 different closets to keep the boxes in. The pieces of paper are bodies. All the other things are components. You can just have multiple layers, one inside another, inside another. You can just think of Fusion 360 as being like one big Russian nesting doll. All right, so we have this side wall here. It looks a little thick for what we're going for, but it's only half the wall, so we'll check that in a minute and see if my dimensions make sense. Now, we're going to need that sketch that we just did, so we're going to click on the eye over here. It's grayed out, and if we turn it back on, now we can see this sketch again. We only needed it for another few seconds, so we'll click Extrude, and we will click this other piece, the short side. Now I could drag that up and remember that dimension, but if we want to change that dimension later, the important thing is only to ever have to set it once. So instead of clicking that and dragging it up, I'm going to go over here and change distance to object, and I will pick the top face of this other piece. And now it's going to stretch that up to the top face. Now it wants to join them together and make it like it's one big piece of wood. But wood isn't normally shaped like this. So I actually want to say new body. So I have two pieces of wood that come together. Now, a lot of people model this stuff with sort of a generic black plastic. And that does speed up the computer processing a little, but it's really only a little. And I find it so much easier because I'm not just using this to turn something that I've already drawn on paper or something that I have blueprints for into a three-dimensional model. I'm actually using the software to do the design as well as the modeling. I'm doing this on the fly. So I look at it and I see, does that look right? Does that feel right? How about this texture? How about this shape? And if it doesn't look like the wood that I'm going to be using, well, what good is that to anybody? So I usually model in the wood that I'm going to construct things with. And since I usually do that with maple, my default is maple. Oh, Canada. All right, so we now have, if we scroll around, one piece of wood butt jointed up against another. And of course, a butt joint is not really what we're going for here. I did sell this as a dovetail box, right? So let's turn off our first sketch and think about where this is going to be. Now, this piece here is going to have to grow some tails. And this piece, the longer piece, is going to have some pins cut into it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it might be a good idea to go and watch somebody cut some dovetails. There are some great videos on YouTube. If you haven't seen James Wright's videos on his Wood by Wright channel, he has, I think, more than 1,000 videos on there about how to do woodworking with only hand tools, and he is incredibly talented at it. So I highly recommend his channel. And if you want to see joints and dovetails in particular, go over and check out Katz Moses Woodworking. He's done so many individual demonstrations of cutting joints, dovetails, and all the various types of dovetails that you can cut for decoration and other types of joinery based on that. So go over and take a look at those if you don't know what we're building here today. I will probably do some streams on actually making them in real life in the future, but for now we're just modeling them. So without going into the explanation any more than just to say that a dovetail is a way to connect two boards together so that they have a mechanical lock rather than just one pressing against another that restrain it in several directions. So in this piece, this short piece can move any direction except in the direction of the long one. If we have a dovetail, it can only move toward the camera, in the direction of the person in this case. It can't move in, it can't move right, left, up, or down once the dovetails hold it in place. So that gets us almost a perfect lock, and the rest, well, we'll do the rest with glue. So we're going to click on this new sketch, and instead of sketching where we did before, I'm going to draw this sketch right on the side of this piece of wood. Now, if you know anything about cutting dovetails, that's pretty much exactly how you would do it. You would draw right on the side of the piece of wood with a pencil, hopefully not with a knife. I know a lot of people love their knives, but I really can't stand doing it with a knife. But what I'm going to do is I am going to click on this line tool, and I need to find the middle of this board. It shows the middle when it has a triangle on it, and I will draw a straight line over to the other side of the board. Great. Now keep in mind we're drawing this on the end of the other side rather than on the face of the board. So if I hit escape and click on it, remember how we changed that to be just a guide because we don't actually need to cut that line into anything. And I'm going to go over and draw one more line. Now, a dovetail is going to look sort of like that. It's going to be the other half as well. Now, I want these lines to be actually mirrored, and we have a tool for that. Up here there is a mirror tool. I will click on the mirror, I will click on the line, and then mirror line, I will mirror it across that center point that we just defined. And I will say OK. Now, the important part about this is that I want these tails to make sense in real life. So we need to make them a good size. I will go to Dimension, and I will say that the outside of this tail is going to be 3/8 of an inch. And I look at that, and I think, how many tails do I actually want? Well, I want 5 on this box. And I know that sounds like quite a lot, but yeah, I think I might want 5. We'll see if 5 looks like too many, but I think 5 is going to be good. And if you have a really nice thin saw, you'll be able to cut 5 into this box. So I'm going to change that. We change a dimension by double-clicking on it. And I'm going to make those 1/4 of an inch at their outside dimension. And on the inside dimension, I'm going to make them 1/8. So we're going to go from 1/4 to 1/8 as our dimensions for our tails. That looks pretty good. And if I hit Finish Sketch, I now see that I have a little box here that looks like a tail on the end of this piece. Now, I don't know about that in terms of the aesthetics of it, but in terms of modeling this nice little box, I think we've pretty much got it. Okay, so we've got one tail. Let's click on Extrude and make the tail. I'll click on it, and I'm going to say, again, instead of distance, to object. Now we're on this side of the board. I'm going to zoom out and scroll around, and I'm going to pick the other side of the board. And if I come back, we could see it's going to draw it there. But this looks like it's going to make a hole instead of a tail, because it's got cut as the operation. So I will change cut to new body and hit OK. And we have now drawn a little dovetail. You can't see it because the board is in the way. Now let's take away this board. If I hide this body, I now see that I have a tail. It's not joined to the other board yet, but give it a minute. We'll get there. Now before we get confused, I'm going to start grouping these together into components. I'll right-click on the first one, which we know is the long board, and I'll say Create Component from Body. I'm going to double-click on it and call that Long Sides. We only have one, but we're going to put them both together. I'll go back and do the same thing with the second body, and I will call it Short Sides. For the third one, I'm not going to worry about it because it's not going to stay in a component for very long. We're actually going to join it right up to the short sides. Actually, let's give them a bit more of a useful name. The short sides, those are going to be our tails. And our long sides, those are going to be our pins. And we'll turn off our pins. Now there is a debate in the woodworking community about whether to cut the tails first or the pins first. And I am very much on the tails first side, but you can go either way with that. What I can tell you, though, is that when you're modeling them, there is no debate. Do the tails first, because it is so much easier to model something that has dimensions going away from the board but is linear, rather than having to cut those angles in with the line tool. So definitely cut your tails first when it comes to doing them in the modeling software. So we need to cut a few more tails. We've been here 5 or 6 minutes now cutting a single tail. You could have done that faster with your saw. But now we are going to speed things up. I will go up here and click on this Create. Any of these things that are in the menu, by the way, are all the way down here in this Create menu as well. So if you can't find it in the toolbar, you can always just open up these menus. I'm going to go to Pattern and Rectangular Pattern. I will select that we want to multiply our body, pick the body, the tail, and I'm going to say spacing. We need to pick a direction. If I go around, I want to move them up and down, so I will click on this blue line, which is the up and down axis, and I'm going to drag this up. Now, that gives me 3 tails, but it gives me 3 tails sort of in the wrong way. I need them to go both ways. So I'm going to change this from one direction to symmetric. Now those tails are pretty big compared to this board. And if I drag it up, I could see I don't really have space for 5, do I? I've probably only got space for 3. So I'd like to make those tails a little bigger. Now, instead of canceling out of this and going through all this step again, I'm just going to say, okay, we have 3 tails. And I'll show you now how to edit and change these without having to go back to the drawing board. Remember that sketch we did? If we right-click on the sketch and hit Edit, we can see in here we have our 1/4 inch at the base, which I'm going to change to be 3/16. Whoops, no, that's the outside. We have these in the wrong order. Let's just drag them out. We'll make this 3/16, and I'm going to make the outside dimension 3/8. Now, that looks like it is a very, very steep angle. So let's see if we can change that to make it a little better. I'm going to make this 5/16. 7/16. That looks a bit more like it. And I'm going to make this 5/16. Make it a little wider, and I think that looks more pleasing. You can change these as many times as you want, and you can just double-click on them and edit them. That's why I've done it so many times, to show you that it doesn't matter how many times you change your mind. I can go back up here to finish sketch again, and you'll see those tails are exactly the same size as in the sketch, but they have multiplied. That is a bit large, so we will go back in here to our sketch, and we will change these one more time. So that is 1/4 to 5/16. And we now have our 3 tails. If we look down here at our history, this keeps track of everything we do. We can right-click on our feature, on our rectangular pattern, and hit Edit. We are a bit too close to the edge up here, so instead of this distance of 1/2 an inch, I'm going to make this 3/8. And they are going to be much, much closer together. That's not too bad. Now, of course, we're not working on trying to get this absolutely perfect. We could go in here and change these dimensions over and over and over again. And, you know, we're going to go in here and make this 7/16 and see how it goes. And if we look at it, I think that's a nicer spacing. Remember, Fusion allows you to keep going in here, and I will keep doing this throughout this and all the other classes. Put in a dimension, open it up, change the dimension. You want to make sure that you have that solidly in your head and in your workflow. So we now have our 3 tails. I think they look all right. They're rather subtle. This is modeled in hardwood, of course, so it is quite subtle. Now, the important thing that we want to do is that we want to join this up so this board is actually got the 3 tails. So if I go to Modify and I say Combine, I can combine the main board with these 3 other boards. And it says Join, and if we're joining, we don't want to keep the tools. We want the body to actually merge into a single body, a single piece of wood, as if you cut it that way. So now if we look at it and we open up our tails and look in our bodies, this body is the single piece of wood. Now, of course, we haven't cut anything yet into the pins board, but we need to have actual tail boards to do that, and this is only half a tail board. So remember that mirroring command we used in the sketch. This mirror command exists up here in the Create menu as well, and if we click that and pick bodies, we can pick this and mirror it across the center of that axis, and you can see we end up with this other piece, and it will join them together. Now we have a whole single tail board. Now we want to do that again. Now I could go up here and go to Create, Mirror, and again, but if I just right-click on the background, the top is always going to give me repeat the last command, which was mirror. So I'm going to click on that body again. I'll choose a mirror pane of the center of the box, and I will mirror it across the center. So now we have two tailboards. I will turn the pins back on, and I'm going to do the same thing. I will mirror it from one side across the center. Oh, wait a second, we forgot to cut it. Cancel. Let's cut some tails into our board and leave the pins. So I will say combine. And I'm going to cut this long edge with the short edge, and we're going to change this to cut. But we will turn on keep tools because we don't want to get rid of the thing we're using to cut. The piece of wood we use as the cutting tool is what they mean by tools in this example. So we say OK. And now, if we turn off our first side, we can look, and it has cut exactly perfect pins into that board. All right, so we will go back to mirroring. We will mirror one side of our long face across the center and join it together. We'll do that one more time across the center in the other direction. If you don't know which one to do, you can always click on it, and then if it's the wrong one, click the X over here and pick another one. So we're going to say OK. Now, that looks like a nice little box, but I think the sides are a little thick, and I want to show you that you can change things at any stage, so it doesn't really matter when you make these decisions. So let's go up to our first sketch. Right-click on it and hit Sketch. Remember when we said this was going to be 3/8? I think we're actually just going to make this 1/4 inch thick. All right, and we hit Finish, and now our box is 1/4 inch. And because of how we cut our tails and did all the modeling based on what was already there, our tails have changed shape to be exactly fitting in our 1/4 inch box sides, which I think looks much more proportional. Looks like a nice little box. All right, so we have our box. A box is going to need two things to make it a box rather than just, 4 pieces of wood held together. If you have a box like this, it's great, but if you try to put anything in it, it's probably just going to fall through. So I think what we really need is a bottom. So let's scroll up, drag our mouse, and start on our bottom face. We're going to model by creating a sketch on the bottom of the box. And I will pick, doesn't matter which one, because what I'm going to do is I have the dimensions now in my sketch for this piece, but I need the sketch dimensions for some other things. So I will hit P for project, and I will pick the other 3 pieces of wood. Project just means copy their dimensions into the drawing. That's all it is. Why they call it project rather than copy dimensions? Well, because it sounds good. And I hit OK. And you can now see I have all these pink lines. The pink lines are projections. Now, I'm just going to draw the bottom of the box. There are a few different ways that you could put a bottom on a box like this, but here's my favorite. Well, not my favorite, but my favorite for little boxes, because it's so easy and you can do it in a really quick period of time. Plus, I really like the aesthetics of it. So I will say a center point rectangle. I will click on the middle, and I will draw it. That isn't exactly where we want the box bottom to be, right? If we put the box bottom there, it wouldn't be attached to anything. So I'm going to drag this side out to about where I want it to be, inside. And I'll zoom in. I will click my dimension tool, and I will say that the outside edge of the box is going to be set in from the side of the box, right here. It's going to be inside a rabbet on the inside of the box, 1/8 of an inch. And because this is a center point rectangle, it mirrors across the center, so I don't have to give that dimension on the other side. It already knows. Now, if I drag this top piece up to about where I want it to be again, I'll do the same thing, but with a little difference. I'll click dimension, and I'll go from the dimension of that line to the inside of the box. So we're going to make a rabbet. But instead of typing in 1/8 of an inch, I'm just going to click on the dimension that is given for the other one. And that means that if I change the first one, it will change the second one too. Remember, We never want to be in a situation where we have to type in a value more than once, because when you're modeling things, you will want to change them. Now, this box bottom is already here, so we're just going to say Finish Sketch. I'm going to turn off the pins and the tails so that we have a better idea of where everything is, and look at this sketch that we've just done. Now, we have the inside and the outside dimensions. So when we actually create this, we need to make sure that we pick all the different pieces of the bottom. It won't separate them. It will make them all into a single piece of wood. So I'm going to click on Extrude, and I will pick all 5 of the pieces that make up that bottom, and they're all going to be a single piece of wood. Now, if I turn back on the tails and pins so I can see them, I am going to say that we are not going to be starting from the bottom of the box. We're actually going to be starting offset. So I changed start from profile pane to offset, and I want to offset it 1/16 of an inch. And our distance, we're going to make it 1/8 of an inch thick. But if we do that, I'll show you what happens when we do that. We're going to say New Component and hit OK. That's going to mean that we're actually modeling 1/16 of an inch off the bottom of the box, but away from the box. So we have a hole here. Now, that's not what we want. We'll right-click on Extrude and hit Edit Feature. And instead of it being distance 0.125 inches, 1/8, we're going to put a minus sign in front of it and allow it to model in the other direction. Anytime you want to go in a different direction, just change the sign from minus to nothing and from nothing to minus. You never need to type in plus. So now we have our little box inset in a rabbit, which I think is great. I think that's a really great way of doing it. Now, how would you actually do that? You would take this piece of wood, you would cut a little 1/8 inch rabbit around the outside that is 1/16 of an inch deep, and you would put glue on our little wooden panel and stick it right up into the box. Now, I know what you're thinking, wood movement and wood movement and wood movement. This box is only 4.5 inches wide. You're not going to get any wood movement that is significant on that. It's really not going to be a problem. But if you are worried about that, what I normally do is I will make this bottom piece out of a sheet of 1/8 inch plywood that is veneered. And that allows me to do several things. It allows me to get rid of this end grain that you see on the end, and it allows me to make sure there is absolutely no wood movement. So you don't need to worry about that. But honestly, I'm telling you, if you have an 1/8 of an inch piece of wood and you're worried about it moving over 4.5 inches, you're living in the ocean. There just isn't that much moisture in the air, and the differential is not going to cause you any problems. So we have that. The other thing that we want to do now is we want to make a top. And you know, I think we can make a top exactly the same way. I really like having a top that is set inside the top of the box with a little pull on it. There are some other ways to make a top, and you can have an inside lip here that is mitered, and you can have the top sit outside of it. You know, there's lots of ways to do it, and I'm going to show you some other ways to model them in other classes, but I really like the idea of just doing it the way we just did that bottom piece. So we're going to turn off the pins and the tails, and we're going to model exactly that same shape, but higher. So I will click on Extrude, I will click on that face, and now I'll turn back on our pins and tails. But instead of starting at the face, we're going to say, start from the object, the top edge of the box. We want to be offset 1/16 of an inch, but we need to be negative. And we're going to make this piece 1/8 of an inch thick. We're not going to join it, we're going to make a new component and hit OK. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's name these. This is the bottom, and this is the top. Okay, so if we mouse over the top, it shows us the top, and if we mouse over the bottom, it shows us we have a bottom. And that's great. Now, we haven't actually cut in our rabbits yet, so we need to do that. I think that's really important to do at this stage. But before we actually do that, I think what we need to do is make it more obvious which piece is which. So let's talk a little bit about the appearances. If I push A for appearance, you can see I'm modeling over here in maple. But because I want to show you that these things are different pieces of wood, now I'm not really going to do this in real life, but we can open up our finished wood panel down here. And I'm going to say that I want the top and bottom to be made of figured walnut. So I'll drag my walnut to bottom, and I'll drag my walnut to top. And I'll hit close. Now, maybe you would make a box out of maple and walnut in this way. I've done it. It looks okay. I'm not really a fan of that huge contrast, but I think it'll work in this case. But remember, sometimes it's easier just to change the wood so that you can see what's going on in terms of things interacting with each other. Now, if I turn off this top, we've got no rabbit. So we need to cut a rabbit in. I'm going to go up here and do it the same way as we did with the cutting of the pins. Combine the side, and we can do them both at the same time. That's why we didn't do this after we made the bottom. We're going to say we're going to cut with the top and the bottom. Keep tools, yes, we don't want to lose them. And I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to go over here and do it for the other side with the top and the bottom. Okay, now we just need to do that twice more. There is a more programmed way to do this, but because we only have 4 sides, and because the programmed way is a little more difficult to explain, I think the beginner-friendly way is to do it just manually with these 4 actions here. Sometimes there are things that are going to save us huge amounts of time by doing them the more efficient way, like making all those tails and pins at once. But when it comes to something like cutting in a couple of rabbits, it's not too bad. So if we now turn off the top and the bottom, we can look at this and see on the top and bottom we have an 1/8 inch rabbit cut all the way around. And if we zoom in, you can see that that piece is actually cut in. Let's see, how do I show it to you? There we go. You can see that we have this nice 1/8 inch rabbit. So when you glue that in, we will now have a bottom. Now, don't glue the top in because we need to be able to pull it off. And how, you might ask, are we going to pull it off? Well, there's 2 ways that we can do this. And I think we're going to go with the drawing on another layer up here, which is as a pull. Now, how are we going to model a pull? I would like to do a sort of a curved pull. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is an absolute beginner's lesson, and we're going to be doing a modeling of a curved object. Well, a curved object is absolutely no more difficult to model than anything else. And because this is a tiny little box and it's not going to take any serious effort to do any of these things, we're probably going to just glue the thing right on anyway. So we don't have to worry about modeling any joinery on curves or anything like that. So I'm going to take this sketch, and I'm going to make a sketch on the side of the top, because that's how we're going to look at our model. And up here, I want to make a little rectangle, a center point rectangle. I will draw my rectangle, and I will make sure that one of the corners touches the top of the box. And then, on the top of that rectangle, I'm going to draw an arc from one point to another, and I'm going to draw that there is a center of that arc. All right, now I just need to give it some dimensions. If I say that from one side of the pull to the other side of the pull is 7/8 of an inch, and I say that from the top of the rectangle part to the bottom of the rectangle part is 1/8 of an inch, and I zoom in, we can see the center is not actually in the center. So we need to have a little guideline to tell us where the center is. Now remember, we get this midpoint here. I'm going to draw a line up, and this is just a guideline, so we'll click on it, and remember how to make things a guideline. We push X, and it becomes dotted. So I will click this coincident, being in the same place, between the center of our rectangle and this dotted line. And now it's exactly in the center. There's one other thing that we need to deal with here, and that is how big a radius is this going to be? Because we could make this very, very tall, or we could make it very, very shallow, more like a thumbnail profile. I think we need more of a subtle thumbnail profile here. Now, I'm going to say that we'll draw there are two ways to do this. One is to know this radius. You can actually think of it in terms of the radius, but that's not really how we woodworkers think. We usually think in terms of straight line distance to the outside of the curve. So I'm going to just draw it from the middle of this box to the middle of the curve, and I'm going to make that a guideline by hitting X, and I will click on dimension, and I'm going to say that it is 1/16 of an inch, and give us a nice thumbnail profile. And you see it's now turned everything black. So what that 1/60th of an inch is how far is the outside of the curve from the top of that rectangular section of the pull. All right, so I'll say finish sketch, and that's great. So we now have our little pull that is there. But, and this is a big but, it's not in the right place. It's on the edge. So I'm going to turn off the top and the bottom. And I am going to say that we will extrude this. Remember, we'll pick those two pieces, but instead of on the profile pane, we're going to turn back on our origin and say from an object, from the middle. We want it to go symmetrically because it's going to go both sides of the middle. Remember, the middle, we modeled right from the middle, and the middle is the middle of the box, and that's why we did that. So I want this piece to be 1/8 of an inch, so we're going to make each direction 1/16 of an inch, and we'll say new component, and hit OK. And now we have modeled a little pull right in the middle, and we can turn the origin off again. If we turn back on our top and bottom, you can now see that we have a nice, delicate little pull right there in the middle of our box lid. I think that's pretty good. It's like a tombstone style pull, which is fairly common for some traditional American design. We can always modify that, make it wider, make it taller, but I'm not going to go into that. I've already showed you how to do those modifications, and I think that looks pretty good. So that's it for today. We have modeled it. Oh, right. I probably want to be complete and call this the pull. And we can put that pull and nest it right inside the top. So if we turn on and off the top, it shows up. And I think we will just go in and make this the same as our regular, oops, where's it gone? Top, pull. We'll make our pull the same maple that we were using for everything else. So there we have it. We have a nice little dovetail box with an inset lid and a glued-in inset bottom. We have nice dovetails on our sides, and that box is looking pretty good. We could add some details to the inside of the box, give us some dividers and things like that. If that's something you want to learn how to do in Fusion 360, leave a comment down below about that we should make a video about that. But otherwise, we're done. I hope that you've enjoyed this and found this to be useful today. If you have liked this, please like. If you haven't, you can always hit dislike. But if you do that, could you please tell us what it was that you disliked about the video and what we can do to make it better for next time? And then come back in a week or two and see if we have actually made some of the changes that you're looking for. If you have any friends who might be interested in this content, some other woodworkers or people looking to get into woodworking and design, feel free to share on your social media or send over a link to our videos to them. They are free and they will continue to be free content for you and them. We also offer online classes for individuals and groups that you can come to us for. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick them in the comments area below or go to our website and send off a question to us. We will be happy to answer. If you want to follow along with more of our videos, check on our channel and click subscribe and ring the bell because we frequently do these live classes. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a wonderful day designing and building in your shop, whatever you have as a project for the moment. Bye-bye.